mandatory retirement age for justices. Would you like to see that at the Washington federal level or not?
So here's the thing, like, honestly, on the 18-year term limit for justice, so founders, I mean, if you go back and read the founders, they said you're going to serve during good behavior, which basically meant lifetime appointment unless you did something to get you impeached and removed from office. And they thought that that was important because they wanted the judiciary to be insulated from the passions of the day, that enforcing the Constitution when it's popular to do so is not that big of a deal. You just follow the wind. It's tough when enforcing the Constitution cuts against the currents of public opinion. And so they wanted to insulate them from having to even worry about it. So something like a retention election would not make sense as the founders understood it. Florida's Constitution is not really the people that framed that were not necessarily in sync with our founding fathers when they did the U.S. Constitution. So the whole idea of retention election is undercuts what the founders wanted to do on that. Age limits, if you're going to do it for everybody in office. If you want to do 75, don't just apply it to justices, apply it to Congress, apply it to the executive. If you're going to do that, that would be one thing. But I don't see how you could say, so an 18-year limit, you'd serve for 18 years, you'd have a fixed term, you wouldn't stand for retention or anything like that. Honestly, like, I don't know that that really, I mean, they don't like the court now because they're on the wrong side of rulings. What happens, I think, when these things happen is you think you're doing it because you think it'll help generate more liberal jurisprudence, and in reality, a lot of times it backfires. It may end up, if you had 18 years, that it would force liberals off the bench, and then maybe a Republican would be able to replace it. So you just don't know how that's going to shake out. But I would be willing, if they're willing to support term limits for members of Congress, that would be a trade that I would make. Because I think if you look at what's gone on, you have so many people that have been there for decades, and what has happened with the debt over those decades. You know, at the turn of the century, our debt was like $5.5 trillion. Now it's $35 trillion 24 years later. That is a failure. That is a failure of leadership, and I think it's because, in part, you know, those folks get there, and the main thing they try to do is stay there for as long as possible, instead of saying you have a limited amount of time to make a difference, lead, get things done, then go back and live under the laws you pass. And incidentally, and I'm not saying this is the only reason, in Florida, we have term limits for our legislature. We also have a balanced budget requirement. But notice, we're the one state, you know, with a massive surplus, tax cuts, and AAA credit rating and paying down debt that we've accumulated over 100 and some years of Florida history. And part of it, I think, is because you have term limits for the legislature. So term limits for members of Congress, a balanced budget amendment for the Constitution, and the legislature, they certified both of those for Article 5 convention, and they certified Congress shall make no law respecting the citizens of the United States that does not also apply to members of Congress themselves. And if you did that, they wouldn't be able to exempt themselves from any laws. So those three reforms, I think, would make a difference. I don't think the stuff in the Supreme Court, an 18-year limit, would ultimately make a positive difference. But I would be willing to trade that for term limits for members of Congress, but I wouldn't support it just in a vacuum. Governor,